You want to eat healthy, but it can be so confusing. When you start reading food labels, you think it will all make sense, but it can be tricky. Don't fall for marketing schemes. Learn to be a savvy shopper and read a label like a pro. You're listening to Healthy Looks Great on You, a lifestyle medicine podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Vickie Petz Kasper. For 2 decades, I practiced as a board-certified obstetrician-gynecologist, navigating the intricate world of women's health. But life took an unexpected turn when my own health faltered. Emerging on the other side, I discovered the transformative power of lifestyle medicine. Now I'm on a mission to share its incredible benefits with you, so buckle up, because we are going on a journey to our very own mini medical school, where you'll learn how lifestyle medicine can help prevent, treat, and sometimes even reverse disease. This is episode 115, How to Read a Food Label. You probably learned to read in elementary school, but do you really know how to read a food label? It's not as easy as you think. Advertisers would like to keep it that way, so you buy their products. But you're not going to fall for it. We're going to start with the basics, then drill down so you know the lingo and the calculations. Don't worry, it's simple once you understand. Think about the food package when trying to figure out whether or not it's healthy. There may actually be a good amount of a nutrient in a food package, but there's also a bunch of bad stuff that makes it an unhealthy choice. Ideally, you should eat whole foods that are minimally processed. Processing depletes nutrients. Now, some of it's necessary because even cutting up produce is considered processing, so is cooking it. But when it's ultra-processed, it's drained of nutritional value. Notice, produce doesn't have a label. If I can give you one diet tip, it's eat single food ingredients. As a general rule, the more ingredients in a food package, the worse it is for your health. Maybe not always, but usually. Eat food in its natural form. Think about eating an apple. Now, back up and think about them growing on the tree and what happens to them before you start chewing. Okay, now what about apple pie? Go through the same process in your head. The number of steps from the branch to your lips impacts the value of nutrition. The less you do to that apple before you eat it, the more nutrient dense it is. God looked at what he created on the 3rd day and said, "It is good," and it's good for you. One of the general principles of nutrition in lifestyle medicine is eat the rainbow. Eat plants that are different colors because different colors indicate different flavonoids and vitamins, and you need variety. When you eat variety, you're more likely to get all of your macros and micros. One time I had a patient with cancer, and she read that carrots could cure cancer. So she ate carrots, and she drank carrot juice until her skin literally turned orange. Eating just one thing, no matter how nutritious it is, that isn't good for you either. And it didn't touch the cancer. Michael Pollan is often quoted as saying, "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants." And that pretty much sums it up. Remember, a plant-based diet isn't necessarily vegetarian or vegan. It's plant-based, meaning you get most of your calories from plants. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine, the USDA, the American Institute for Cancer Research, and the Harvard School of Public Health all agree that a plant-based diet is healthiest. The most data on benefits of diet pertain to the Mediterranean diet, and even though it allows for fish and some lean meats, it's still plant-based. Now, before we go to mini medical school today and learn some science, you need to know a little bit of history. Don't say ugh. This is relevant. Before the late 1960s, food labels didn't tell you much about what was in the package. At best, they'd tell you the number of calories and maybe the milligrams of sodium, and that was so people who were on a special diet because of a particular health issue could have some guidance. But think about it. In the late 1960s, my family only had one car. My dad drove it to work every day, so we went to the grocery store with a list every couple of weeks on a Saturday, and we hauled a whole buggy full of groceries home, and my mom cooked every night. We didn't eat out during the day at all, and in the evening, mostly only if we were on vacation. Maybe on special occasions, but even then it was usually a home-cooked meal. And I doubt we were much different than any of our neighbors. It's just how it was in those days. As packaged food started hitting the markets, the FDA stepped in to regulate labeling so consumers would know what they were eating. Food labels have evolved since regulations were first imposed in 1973. The FDA makes changes in the nutrition facts label based on evidence. And part of understanding science is keeping up. The biggest mistake I see people make when interpreting medical information is using old data. Science is a field that requires continuous research, and when evidence comes to light, recommendations may change. So learning to check sources and dates is super important. Before the 1990s, food manufacturers could pretty much make up confusing and false claims. Surprise, right? That led to Congress passing the Labeling and Education Act in 1992 that gave the FDA a mandate to design a standardized label and require it to be displayed on packaged food. They came up with some new terms too. Before, nutritionists talked about the RDA, which is the recommended daily allowance. You probably heard that term back in home ec. But that wouldn't work for labeling because there's no RDA for sugar or bad fats. So they came up with a new term, DRVs, Daily Reference Values. See how one little nuance makes a difference? Now, it's not recommended, it's a reference, and the implications couldn't be more polar opposite. Percent daily value is your vocabulary word for the day. Oh, wait, that's 3 words. Oh, well, percent daily value is a term invented for food labeling based on the RDA, but they're not personalized for you, your weight, your caloric needs, or your diagnosis. They can be, but the label is for the general public. In 1993, they finalized the Nutrition Facts panel on the back, and today we are going to dissect that label so you know what you're eating. The FDA updated the Nutrition Facts panel in May of 2016 to reflect the latest nutrition science and help consumers make healthier choices. Of course, there have been various deadlines and extensions of deadlines. Besides the Nutrition Facts label, you also need to know about front package labeling. Now, this is really interesting. The FDA regulates some claims, and others they're just like, whatever. No, really. They leave it to the Federal Trade Commission because it's considered marketing or advertising. And the FTC is like, whatever. We hadn't reviewed the science because we're the FTC. So here's what you need to do. Ignore it. Pick it up, turn it over, and read the ingredients and the Nutrition Facts label. Because you're going to know how to read a label better after this podcast, and you're not going to be sucked in by tricky marketing. But since I brought it up, let's go ahead and look at the front of the package. I mean, after all, that's what you see when you look at the shelf, right? The main advice I will give you is always be skeptical. Don't fall for claims that something is natural or all natural. It doesn't mean there aren't artificial additives. Also, just turn your head when you see low sugar, less sweet, or lightly sweetened. It means nothing. There's literally no definition for it. Now, if you can't resist looking at the front label since it's staring you in the face, at least look for the things that are regulated. If something says it's a good source, that means one serving must contain at least 10 to 19% of the daily value nutrient. An excellent source has to contain 20% or more. And gluten-free must contain less than 20 parts per million of gluten. Certified organic means it can't contain genetically modified organisms, and it's processed without conventional pesticides, herbicides, synthetic fertilizers, bioengineering, ionizing radiation, or sewage sludge. Yeah, you heard me right. I said sewage sludge. Gross. Organic animals have to eat organic feed and be free from growth hormone and antibiotics. But remember, organic foods may still contain the same number of calories, fats, proteins, and carbs as non-organic foods. For example, organic butter is probably just as bad for you as any butter. And by the way, I'm a Southern girl who loves to cook with butter, but I'm learning to use alternatives. Now, let's shed a little light on the term light. These are processed to either reduce calories or fat. And while that may sound healthy, it's not necessarily. Sometimes when something has reduced fat, it has added sugar to make it taste better. And the opposite is just as true. If the package claims to be low fat, low cal, low carb, they have a legal limit on the number of calories, fat grams, or carbs they contain per serving. So guess what they do? They make the serving teeny tiny. Sneaky, isn't it? So if you eat a normal amount, which is more than a nibble, you may end up eating like 7 servings according to the package, and then it's no longer low fat, low calorie, or low carb. And what about multigrain? We need more grains, don't we? That one's got to be good for you. Wrong. All it means is that they put more than one type of grain in it. Doesn't mean it's a whole grain that still contains its nutrients. Whether you have 1 refined grain or 20 doesn't matter if they stripped all the nutrients out and the fiber as well when they processed it. Let's take a closer look at grains because food manufacturers are really tricky. If you don't see the word whole in front of grain, then it isn't whole grain. I was a cheerleader in high school, so let me help you remember. I say whole, you say grain. Whole grain, whole grain. That's it. If it says enriched, that's a clever way of saying it's not whole. We processed it a lot and there wasn't any nutrition left in it, so we enriched it so we could fool you into thinking it was good for you. Knowing that makes me feel so much smarter, like I'm on to you. Refined is not good. Just eat fine food, not refined. If they got to anything to your food, they've done too much processing. Front of packaging should say 100% whole wheat, not multigrain, not made with whole grain, not stone ground wheat flour. Those sound good, don't they? Well, they knew when they invented those terms, they were trying to sell more of their product. And the word enriched is particularly deceptive. I mean, who doesn't want to add foods to their diet that enrich? Well, when flour is refined, the natural nutrients are lost. And the reason they do this is so that the flour is fine textured and smooth, and it can sit on the shelf a long, long time. So they add nutrients back in, and typically they add B vitamins like thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and folic acid, which is super important because that prevents certain birth defects called neural tube defects. And iron is often added as well. And they started doing this because these nutrients are essential to good health. And when people started eating packaged breads, it led to deficiencies. The dilemma is that enriched products are cheap. And they have a long shelf life, so it's a trade-off, bridging the gap between nutrition and affordability. But processing always leads to inferior nutrition when it comes to vitamins and fiber is the gold mine when it comes to feeling full and maintaining gut health. Eating white bread won't really help you get the 28 grams of fiber you need every day. When you're looking at the front of the package, there are some claims that the FDA has approved. They are that calcium and vitamin D help prevent osteoporosis, that fats and lipids are associated with cancer, that saturated fat and cholesterol increase the risk of heart disease, and sugar causes cavities. Fruits and vegetables prevent cancer, fiber found in grains prevents cancer, fiber, especially soluble fiber found in grains, fruits, and vegetables, reduces the risk of heart disease. Folic acid prevents neural tube birth defects, salt adversely affects blood pressure, and soy protein reduces the risk of heart disease. Now, are you ready to pick up the package and turn it over so we can read the nutrition facts label? Before you think mini medical school is going to be a piece of cake made with enriched flour, think again. There's some science to understand if you're going to be proficient at label reading, especially when we move on to ingredients. But for now, the label. It's printed in bold letters on the back of the package. Nutrition facts. In the top section, you'll see serving size, calories, and nutrient information. In the bottom section, you'll find the percent daily value based on a 2,000 kilocalorie a day diet. That's the general recommendation for healthy people who are trying to maintain their current weight. Now remember, the FDA mandated that it's standardized. So no matter what package you're looking at, the first thing under the heading is serving size. This too is standardized, and it's usually reported as cups, pieces, or weight by ounces, grams, and so on per container. Now, I want you to pay particular attention to the serving size. You may grab a healthy-looking bag of trail mix that's 36 ounces. It's got some nuts and raisins and, maybe a few pieces of chocolate. And you turn it over and you see on the label that it only has 150 calories. So you eat the whole bag. Then you realize it has 34 servings, so that was really over 5,000 calories. And maybe you would never eat a whole bag of trail mix, but I certainly have. And speaking of calories, that's next on the label after serving size. It is reported as the amount of calories per serving. So again, you have to multiply by the total number of servings to understand what the package contains. And trust me, you'll be shocked at what some food manufacturers consider a serving. Wouldn't fill me up for sure. Next thing listed on the label is always the percent daily values. Now remember, this is a percentage of the daily value for each nutrient in a serving of food. They are reference amounts to consume or not exceed each day. And this is the key to understanding if a food has high or low nutritional value. Well, actually, the secret is to know what you need more of and what you need less of. And if you're taking notes, you need less saturated fats, less sodium, and less added sugar. That includes natural sugars. You need more dietary fiber, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. The amount of trans fat needed is a big fat 0. Now, you can follow what's called the 5-20 rule as a general guide. If it has less than 5% of the daily value of a nutrient, that's considered low. And if it has greater than 20% of the daily value of a nutrient, that's considered high, the 5-20 rule. Now, the first thing reported on the label is total fat. It's broken down into saturated fat and trans fat. And before we move on, we need to talk more about trans fat, also known as partially hydrogenated oils. They taste really, really good, and they're really, really bad for you. Food manufacturers put them in food to enhance the taste, texture, and shelf life. But they raise cholesterol, which contributes to heart disease and cause cancer, and obviously that's not good. So the FDA outlawed adding this food in 2018. But they extended the deadline to 2020. FDA says it's not generally recognized as safe. Your label should always say trans fat 0 grams. Not that it doesn't occur naturally in some foods, it does, such as meat and dairy products. And we're going to back up and talk about saturated fat. Your body can make all the saturated fat it needs, so you really don't need to eat more. Lowering consumption of saturated fat and using unsaturated fat instead, like olive oil, nuts, seeds, avocados, can prevent many diseases, including heart disease, which is the #1 killer of adults in the United States. It's recommended to limit intake of saturated fat to 5 to 6% of your daily calories, and that's less than 20 grams. Though you need to keep fat intake as low as possible, the type of fat really matters. Replace it with whole grains, fruits, and veggies, and those healthy fats, which are unsaturated. Moving on down the label, the next thing is cholesterol. Our bodies are fearfully and wonderfully made and can manufacture all the cholesterol we need. And here's the deal. Most foods that contain a lot of cholesterol also contain saturated fat. So aim to keep both low. Up next is sodium. I cannot stress how important this is. And when you start reading labels, you're going to be shocked. The daily value is 2,300 milligrams. But there's a push by some researchers to reset that to 1,500 milligrams. Are you ready for this? That's about 2/3 of a teaspoon of salt per day. And you may think, oh, well, I never pick up the salt shaker. Well, that's fantastic. But most people get over 70% of their sodium from food they don't either eat at home or prepare at home. So here's another rule of thumb to follow. Don't eat foods that contain more milligrams of sodium than calories. For example, pretzels contain 110 calories and 450 milligrams of sodium. Yikes! In addition to sugar, this is what we as Americans overconsume by the dump truck load. Speaking of sugar, next on the label is total carbohydrates. Under the total, the first thing reported is dietary fiber. Fiber's only found in plants. And remember, we need 28 grams per day, and most people don't get enough. Whole grain wheat, brown rice, quinoa, millet, oatmeal, and barley are good sources. Foods with at least 3 grams of fiber per serving are considered a good source. And it helps your bowels keep moving normally, keeps you feeling full, maintains gut health, and ideal weight. The Harvard School of Public Health recommends a maximum of a 10-to-1 ratio of carbs to fiber. Those foods are good for you, and unfortunately, they're also usually expensive. The next category under carbohydrates is total sugars, including added sugar. Now, this is the new kid on the block. I mean, sugar isn't new, but added sugar was added to the labels. Now, that seems like multiplication. And a spoonful of sugar makes the calories go up, the healthfulness go down, and, oh, never mind, you didn't come here to hear Mary Poppins, and I can't sing. So let's examine sugar a little more closely. Sugar, sucrose, dextrose should be less than 10% of daily calories. According to the American Heart Association, women should limit added sugar to 6 teaspoons a day and 9 for men. Now, a teaspoon is 4 grams of sugar, and on average, Americans eat, you ready for this? 82 grams of sugar a day, and that's 328 empty calories. Naturally occurring sugar in fruit isn't listed as added sugar because, well, it's not added. It was already there when the apple was picked from the tree. Next is the ingredient list, and this is the most important thing to sharpen your expertise if you want to be a savvy eater. Ingredients are listed separately from nutrition facts, usually underneath. And each ingredient is listed in descending order by weight. So the first ingredient is key because whatever's first is what makes up the bulk of the weight of the product. So the first ingredient should be something good, something you need to eat, something that's whole food like almonds, not sugar. And here's how to spot a lot of sugar. Put it in your mouth, and if it tastes good, spit it out. Now, that is not true. That is, of course, unless you've trained your palate to ultra sweet. And here's the deal. Sugar gets disguised. It'll say things like cane syrup, brown sugar, corn syrup, or high fructose corn syrup, dextrose, fructose, agave, nectar, and coconut sugar. And artificial sweeteners include sucralose, saccharin, and aspartame. And just like hydrogenated oils, just say no. And when it comes to carbohydrates, the nutrition facts panel isn't going to tell you how many whole grain servings are in a product. So you got to look at the ingredient list. I went to my pantry and randomly pulled out a package. It was Parmesan cheese crisp that I bought to go on a salad. The brand is Simple Truth. Just trust us. We are the food manufacturer, and we say it's Simple Truth. And on the front, there's this little icon that says free from. But it doesn't say what it's free from. And I never even noticed it until I intentionally looked at the front of the package. And I'm not sure what kind of subliminal message they're trying to send, but it's free from something. And also on the front, it says 100% baked cheese, keto friendly. Someday on this podcast, we'll talk about keto, but today we're looking at labels. So turn the package over and start with nutrition facts. There were 8 servings per container. Now, this package weighed a grand total of just under 2 ounces. So rounding that up, the package contained 2 ounces divided by 8 servings, which is 1/4 of an ounce. The package says that's about 7 pieces. Okay. Calories are 40, so if I added 14 pieces to my salad, I'd need to double the calories to 80. The total fat was 3 grams, which is 4% of the daily value. Saturated fat was 1.5 grams, which is 8% of the daily value. And that seems like not too much, unless you think about it being 1/4 of an ounce and only 7 pieces. Trans fat was 0, cholesterol 10 milligrams, which is 3% of the daily value, sodium 85, which is more than double the amount of calories, and 4% of the daily value. Total carbs was 0, dietary fiber was 0, total sugar 0, proteins 3 grams, vitamin D 0, calcium 90 milligrams, which is 6% of the daily value. Iron was 0, potassium was 10 milligrams, and the ingredients were Parmesan cheese, pasteurized milk, cheese cultures, salt, enzymes. And at the end it said contains milk. And the reason that last one is included is that labels have allergy information. Other things you'll find on the package include sell-by date. Now, this doesn't mean you have to consume it by that date. It just means if it's still sitting on the shelf of the store, they should remove it. Then there's the best by date. This is the optimum time to eat it before it loses some of its flavor and quality. The use by date is for peak freshness, and it's not as important for packaged foods that have enough preservatives to last until the next eclipse, but it is important for perishable products like meat, eggs, and dairy. For more information, I've included a link to the FDA Nutrition Facts label in the show notes. Congratulations, you passed mini medical school. Next time you go to the grocery store, take this knowledge with you. Ignore most of what's on the front of the package and pay attention to serving size. Don't buy those marketing gimmicks like light, low, and reduced. Instead, turn the package over, check the ingredients, especially the first one, and look for foods with fewer ingredients. Choose all natural sugars, not artificial or added, and avoid foods that contain a lot of preservatives or ingredients that require a chemistry degree to understand. You'll be smart like my husband. He said, most energy bars are just cookies in disguise. And there's some truth to that. So, when you go grocery shopping, be smart and be healthy, because healthy looks great on you. The information contained in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not considered to be a substitute for medical advice. You should continue to follow up with your physician or healthcare provider and take medication as prescribed. Though the information in this podcast is evidence-based, new research may develop and recommendations may change.